Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is Miss Gooding, and I'm here to talk to you today about the League of Nations, which was attempted right after World War I. And Woodrow Wilson was a big proponent of the League of Nations, and also he had 14 points, which I will get to as well. By the fall of 1918, the German army realized that winning World War I was probably not going to happen. And so there was a talk beginning about some sort of treaty being signed between these European nations. So on November 11th of 1918, Germany and the Allies signed an armistice, which is an agreement to stop fighting. However, they had not yet signed a formal peace treaty, which ended the war. And so some of the allies, especially France and Britain, because remember, you guys, France and Britain especially lost a ton of men, and France had gotten completely beaten up. If you look at pictures of Verdun, France, after World War I, it was really torn apart. So there was a lot of anger in these two nations, especially. So France and Britain, they actually wanted a peace treaty that would punish Germany for the war, and they especially wanted Germany to accept blame, and they wanted them to pay enormous reparations for their part in World War I. Woodrow Wilson had a different perspective after World War I was over. And so he created, he wanted something called peace without victory. And what that meant is that without victory means that no nation would be forced to take blame or be punished for the war. However, France and Britain specifically were not in favor of that. Wilson also had a fairly idealistic vision for how to use peace to prevent future wars, and he laid this out in his 14 points. And we'll look more specifically at the 14 points in class. But he presented this to Congress, and central to his vision was an establishment of the League of Nations. And this League of Nations would be an international organization that would help protect peace by providing a forum for resolving international disputes and conflicts. The Treaty of Versailles was a peace treaty negotiated in the summer of 1919, and it was negotiated in the city of Versailles, France. So many nations were in attendance, but it was France, specifically England, Italy, and the United States that had the most power to dictate the terms of peace after World War I. So many European leaders actually insisted that most of Wilson's ideas were not applicable. They did not feel that Wilson had their best interest in mind, and so they resisted most of his ideas, especially in the 14 points. And they also insisted that the treaty, this peace treaty, would punish Germany. They still wanted those severe reparations that would cripple the German economy. They just really did not want Germany to come out of this fully intact. And so the Allied leaders did, however, agree to establish a League of Nations. And so that was the one of Wilson's 14 points that was supported by many of the European nations. So this new organization, which was called the League of Nations at the time, included a General Assembly for all member states and also an Executive Council, which comprised the world's most powerful nations. Specifically, the Executive Council was given the power to create a court that would manage disputes between nations. And as a member in the League, each member nation was expected to reduce its military to only what was needed for self-defense. And they also were required to submit any conflicts with other member states to arbitration by the League before going to war. So it was kind of a insurance program, if you will. And a lot of people did see the benefits of this. And so, by the way, you guys, here are many of the leaders during the time. You have French Prime Minister Georges Clemenceau on the left, American President Woodrow Wilson in the center, and British Prime Minister David Lloyd George after signing the Treaty of Versailles, which again did definitely punish Germany. At home, however, Wilson did face a lot of opposition to his ideas. So President Wilson actually signed the Treaty of Versailles, but the Constitution required treaties to be approved by 2/3 of the Senate to become law. And so Wilson, because of this, faced a tough political battle when he returned from Paris back to the United States. And so some senators were very, very much opposed to the treaty that he had signed. So a group of 12 to 18 senators became known as the Irreconcilables, and they opposed the treaty at all costs. The Treaty of Versailles was no good. Okay, so other senators were willing to negotiate on the treaty, but there were some concerns about the terms of the agreement for the League of Nations. Many of these leaders, specifically led by a senator named Henry Cabot Lodge from Massachusetts, became known as Reservationists because this group would only agree to the Treaty of Versailles if it included certain reservations that addressed aspects of the treaty that they didn't like. And so Wilson definitely was kind of playing two worlds. He was trying to negotiate with the European nations, but also he had senators to please at home. Okay, one of the principal objections was actually some of the language in Article 5 of the League of Nations Charter, which stated this: the members of the League undertake to respect and preserve, as against external aggression, the territorial integrity and existing political independence of all members of the League. So, what I would like you to just stop and think about is I want you to kind of speculate about why some members would oppose this particular section of the Treaty of Versailles. And a lot of the documents that I'm going to show you will reference this particular article. So that's kind of what I want you to think about as we continue this lesson. Wilson definitely had a battle with the Senate. If he had been willing to compromise with the reservationists in the treaty of the language of the treaty, it probably would have passed. But he was unwilling to make even small symbolic changes to his ideas. So rather than compromise in order to please his senators, Wilson went on a nationwide speaking tour to drum up support for his particular treaty. But Wilson unfortunately fell ill during this tour and had to return to Washington, D.C., where he then unfortunately suffered from a very disabling stroke that would leave him physically and mentally impaired for the rest of his presidency. And that's another story. But he was actually never able to muster the political support needed to bend the Senate to his will. And so there it stayed. The Senate actually voted on the treaty 3 times during the remainder of Wilson's final term in office, rejecting it every single time. And so the Treaty of Versailles was never ratified by the American Senate. And the United States actually never joined the other 63 countries in the League of Nations. So even though it was President Wilson's idea. Interesting, huh? All right, so one of the questions, again, that I want you to think about is specifically why did senators oppose joining the League of Nations in 1919? And that is the question we're going to explore today. Thanks, you guys.